right, I think we're going to get started here in the interest of everyone's time. Still got a couple people logging on, but no problem. Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm Megan Tribble with the Executives Club. We're excited to welcome you here for this conversation with Thea Polancic and David Gardner, brought to you by our wonderful sponsors at NTT Data and Sidley Austin. So without any further ado, I am going to introduce one of our Financial Services Forum co-chairs, Andrew Gouzier with Sidley Austin, to get us started.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual forum event, Defining Value with David Gardner, Breaking the Rules and Getting Returns. My name is Andrew Gouzier. I'm a partner at Sidley Austin and co-chair of the Executives Club Financial Services Forum, along with NTT Data Services. I am excited today to welcome you for a lively discussion on how taking a creative approach fueled by purpose amidst a global pandemic at that can ensure a business will come out stronger on the other side. Now at this point, we ask that attendees please turn off their audio during the fireside chat portion. You can keep your video on if you like, but it's not required. And when it's time for the audience Q&A, you'll be instructed to turn your video back on, should you choose to ask a question. I am thrilled to feature Thea Polancic, founder and president of the Chicago chapter of Confidential Capitalism, as today's moderator. She will be leading a conversation with David Gardner, co-founder of The Motley Fool. David is also chief rule breaker at The Motley Fool, which is a financial services company that he founded with his brother in 1993. The Motley Fool's purpose is to make the world a smarter, happier, and richer place. To that end, David has picked stocks for a worldwide membership for 27 years now, and has hosted his own weekly podcast, Rule Breaker Investing, since 2015. Welcome, David and Thea. Before we get started, I'm going to show you a few ways to interact with us throughout the event. We encourage you to ask questions and chat with your fellow attendees during the session. Here's how you can do this. We encourage you to use the chat feature throughout the discussion to speak with other participants. We'll have time for audience questions at the end of our meeting, and you'll be prompted to turn your video back on in about 30 minutes. At that time, to ask a question, use the raise your hand feature, and you will be called on when it's your turn. The raise your hand button can be found by hovering over the participants button with your mouse, and a taskbar will appear like the one that you see on screen. Anyway, thank you all today for joining us, and thank you very much to our speakers for taking the time out of their busy schedules to share their insights with us. I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Thea, to kick off the discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you, Megan and Margaret and everyone from the Executives Club for your partnership with the Chicago Conscious Capitalism chapter. It is really exciting for us to be here today and co-hosting this event with David Gardner. It is a real pleasure to be able to be here with David. He is one of my favorite people, and I was thinking the other day, if I were going to create a fantasy book club, David would be in my first round draft pick. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do too. So just to get us kicked off, David, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the Motley Fool, and especially for those people who aren't familiar with being foolish and the flavor that you guys have created, just like a little bit about the company, and so we can get a feel for the organization.
Thank you, Thea. And what a delight it is to be with you all today. And thank you. I wish I could be with you today in Chicago. That was the plan. It was always the plan. But we know this is not the year that you would have made plans and kept them. But we did keep this promise that we would do this together. And I'm so happy to be joined. I especially want to shout out to Heather Gardner. Heather, we don't know each other yet, but you've spelled your surname correctly. And I'm delighted to notice you, presumably a second or third cousin among the august group here. And what a wonderful group. I did see a list of all the attendees, and I very much feel like a small f fool in the face of such intelligence and a lot of accomplishment. I also love the city of Chicago, where my wife's family spent some years. Anyway, so thank you very much. Thea, 3 quick things about the Motley Fool. First thing, well, nice job on mentioning our purpose at the start. Thank you, Andrew, to make the world smarter, happier, and richer. As a purpose-driven person who believes that leaders need to call everybody into purpose to really do something special together. That's like the first calling of a leader, I think. Purpose means so much to me. I know it does to you as well, Thea. You have been rocking conscious capitalism probably longer than I have. I think I've seen you at the summits in Austin, Texas 10 years ago. So that's really important, our purpose. That's number one. Number two, we have scaled to the point that we have 468 more employees than we thought we would, because Tom and I, when we started 27 years ago, didn't think we'd have any employees. This was a newsletter for our parents' friends, but the internet came along and enabled lots of opportunities for us. So the silly name that I picked out of Shakespeare, where Act 2, Scene 7 of As You Like It, a wonderful comedy, one of Shakespeare's comedies, but the best scene in all of Shakespeare to celebrate foolishness.
This is a same guy, just doing a different, it's a broader group.
Celebrating foolishness. For me, the fool always challenges conventional wisdom. And of course, they did it back in court jester times. And I hope today with humor, using humor as a way to teach, to instruct. So it was never supposed to be a company, but we found all of a sudden that our partner AOL, way back in the day, since people were paying $4 an hour back then to use the internet. Do you remember that, Thea?
Oh my gosh.
How
I remember
about
the CDs. I got lots and lots of those CDs.
Yeah, those AOL CDs used as cocktail coasters. I mean, yeah, that was quite a time. So they were an incredible partner for us, and obviously we greatly benefited and started hiring people. So now we're up to 470 employees today. We've been hiring quite a lot in 2020, which has been a surprising thing for us. Anyway, that's number two. That's sort of the relative size where we are as a company. Somewhere about $500 million in sales, very profitable, and something that, I pinch myself every day. I love what I do. And then the third and final thing I guess I'd want to mention is that the Motley Fool that you might have known at keyword Fool back on AOL back in the day, in a lot of ways, we're still doing the same thing. I'm picking stocks, so is Tom. People follow us. We hope that they beat the market. If they do, they will renew their subscription. And that's a big basis of our company, subscribers. But I'd also want you to know that we have asset management and wealth management capabilities today. We also, on the other side of things, find a better credit card, find a better interest rate through the Ascent, which is a sister company of ours. We've added Motley Fool Ventures, which is our venture capital wing. And I love talking about all these things, of course, but if you thought we were just picking stocks, we still are, but we're doing a lot more than we ever would have dreamed 27 years ago.
Thank you, Tom. And I appreciate you giving us a sense of the breadth of what you do. I know, or Tom, David, I remember when I first visited, my thought was like, oh, this is a financial services company. And then what I really realized was that you were a digital marketplace or a digital marketing company, a media company, a membership organization. Like there were so many different kind of things that you had intersected in order to create what became the Motley Fool.
Well, thanks, Thea. I mean, again, we started with a belief in the medium. Truly, some of my earliest television interviews, I remember being on CNN and they said, coming back, we're going to have somebody who believes you will use your credit cards over the internet back after this. And it was me. I was like an apologist for the internet. I believed. I thought e-commerce would happen, but I hope we can all, those of us who are old enough, can get back in that state of mind of the mid-1990s where there was doubt that the internet would ever be for real. Would it ever be more than just chat rooms? Which is the way people would refer to our site at the time. And we sure did have chat rooms. We loved the interactivity of it, but really we loved the medium. And while it can be used for good or for ill, like any powerful tool, for the most part, it's been used wonderfully. And as a consequence, digital has increasingly taken over parts of our lives today. And we're letting it, especially in 2020, because we need it more than ever before. So we're obviously very fortunate. We did not create the internet, unlike Al Gore, who went to our same high school, by the way. We at least went to high school with the guy who founded the internet, but we certainly didn't found it, but we loved it. As young men, we believed in the new medium, and we've been rewarded for that.
You had mentioned a little bit the business is going great. I think we all as business leaders have a certain curiosity around which businesses are flourishing, why are they flourishing, like what's happening. Can you just give us a sense of kind of how the Motley Fool has been doing over the last 6 months?
I will. And I'll add in a bonus answer to talk about the stocks that I'm picking and what I'm seeing out there, because it's all kind of tied together. I'll also try not to make it a really long answer. So the short answer is that the Motley Fool is thriving in a way that I could never have believed. we were already at a really good point. We started to hockey stick with our business 2 years ago in year 25. Most people try to hockey stick in year 5. That's what their VCs hope. Maybe year 15. We started 25 years in, which we could talk about or not. But suffice it to say, a couple of years ago, we moved from hiring about 25 new people a year net to more like last year 100. And this year it'll be more than 100. And that means we've been hiring 70 people since COVID. They've never been to our office before. We haven't gotten to shake hands, fist bump, whatever you do with new employees at your place. We haven't been able to hang out with our fellow fools. And yet we've been hiring. And we've seen, of course, now to tie it into the greater market, we've seen companies that are digital that have that within their business model, or maybe how they live and breathe, be accelerated. Because I think one of the cliches, and usually cliches are cliches because they're often true, at least up to a point. One of the cliches of 2020 is that all of these trends have been accelerated. So the disruption of traditional business models, bricks and mortar, et cetera, it was already happening in 2017, 18, 19, but all of a sudden we got to like year 2024 in just 2020 because of this acceleration through COVID. So we have seen that. We have been beneficiaries of that. We don't talk a lot about it. We wish it all ended yesterday. But Thea, it has been a shock. And I mean, pinch myself in that we, and my brother's leadership has been outstanding. And I can talk about one or two things we've done that are new that have helped. But that's where we are today.
Well, go ahead. So what are a couple of the things that you've done that are new?
Sure. I mean, I think something that none of us thought about, but starting in March, do you remember when the stock market was losing 1 percentage point a day over the course of 32 days? And it was 35% drop, the fastest, biggest drop in history, if not at least in recent history. Somewhere about a third of the way through, my brother Tom said, you know what we should do? We should open up Zoom, which we've been using at our company for a few years. Anyway, we should turn that into a TV channel, kind of like this, and run it live on our website and just answer our members, speak to the pain, what's happening, share what we're doing, be real. They've always followed us maybe a click away, or in some cases a paper newsletter back in the day, but why not be there with them and use this interactive medium? And so Motley Fool Live was born. And that's what we call basically the TV channel that's been running on our website from 9 to 5 every weekday, and Saturdays 12 to 5, and Sundays best of, for 6 months now. And nobody had that as a plan. It was basically, what is our purpose? To make the world smarter, happier, and richer. Okay, you always innovate through your purpose. You shouldn't innovate outside of your purpose. And so what's going to make people smarter, happier, and richer? Well, how about if we just speak to them directly and say, here's the fears that I have, and here's what we're doing, and here's how our services work. And we've had CEOs on and authors, and we've just used it. We've turned it into full CNBC, except that CNBC is so focused on what's going to happen a minute ago and 3 minutes from now. And we're just sort of talking to, I don't know, people who think and play the long-term game. And so anyway, that's been the big shock. Nobody had a plan that way, but Tom's leadership, and I think our capabilities. We have a lot of contractors who contribute to us. And so turns out some of them are TV stars now. And this is all just for members. It's not going to rival CNBC in its first year, but it's really something we're going to look back on and say, that was special, what we did there.
I appreciate what you're pointing to, because I'm hearing from other companies too, which is how can we use this time at the pressure cooker or the outside forces of this time as a crucible that actually causes us to innovate and transform and create new products and actually come out of this competitively in a different place than we were before we came in. And so just really appreciating what you're saying as an example of that.
Well, it is. And that's obviously kind of a consumer facing new offering we have. We've also changed a lot of our practices just internally, thinking especially of our culture. And that's something that we've really tried to build up into something great over 27 years. Rome spent more like 270 years, or more than that, about 1,000 years to build itself up into the power that it was. So culture is built over time. We're still an early stage small company in the grander scheme, but our culture is something that we've tested and learned into over 27 years. And the changes that we've made which I detailed on our podcast, but I have my Rule Breaker Investing podcast. If anybody wants to hear a free podcast and hear from our two heads of people and culture at the Fool a week and a half ago, you'll see Company Culture Tips Work From Home Edition, where we just sort of share out what we're doing differently and how we're trying to make it work or even optimize or excel during this time. A quick example would be that we've dedicated some of our bench strength simply to making phone calls to each of our employees, periodic check-ins. Some of them only needed one call. I'm good. Others have needed substantially more than that. So that was something we weren't doing before. We weren't calling people up and saying, "How are you doing? How are you? How are you doing?" And so, having just talked to John Mackey earlier today, the founder of Whole Foods, the founder of Conscious Capitalism, because he has a new book out called Conscious Leadership, which I'm here to highly recommend. In fact, here it is. So it's just out this week. There we go. Thank you, Nancy. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a really outstanding book. I haven't even finished it yet. Thea, I would love to be in your book club someday. I try to finish all the books before I talk to the authors. The problem is I've been reading this one aloud, page by page, to my wife, because she cooks while I read to her. That's worked for 30 plus years now. And I couldn't read fast enough because this just came out like a week ago. But I already knew a lot of it. And anyway, I know the importance of love in the workplace. And love sounds like a weak word, or if you try to talk about it on CNBC, you sound like some frou-frou crazy man. But when we think about what we really mean by love, it has to be present in business. It's one of the most powerful things that we could do as leaders of conscious businesses is make the workplace a loving place. And so that's very much on my mind and how we're thinking about 2020 internally with our culture.
David, you sound like as if frou-frou crazy man is a label that is not unfamiliar for you. Is that,
I mean, sure. I mean, both Tom and I don't have my jester cap on today because I thought it would be more appropriate for the Executives Club if I were wearing a jacket. But, I have regularly worn on television and in public my jester cap, and I'm very happy to do so. Maybe if the Q&A gets crazy enough, Thea, I might disappear again and come back with my cap on if that would be appropriate. But yeah, so I'm obviously very comfortable making a fool of myself in public. And we have fun with it, right? And frankly, if you're going to come to work at the Motley Fool, you would expect your employer to be a fun place to work. I mean, we better be foolish at the Motley Fool. Otherwise, what the heck are we doing?
I'm having one of those parental moments right now. So awesome.
Would you like me to stall for you briefly, Thea?
I think we're okay. Well, so you mentioned Conscious Capitalism and John's book. And one of the things that I think would be really helpful is for you to give us just a layman's, I know that you've been around conscious capitalism for a long time, but I also know that you interact with a lot of folks who aren't familiar with conscious capitalism and perhaps are skeptical or even hostile to the idea of conscious capitalism. So I would love just to hear, how do you describe sort of what is conscious capitalism to folks for whom it's not something that's already familiar?
Sure. Well, conscious capitalism, first of all, is Googleable. So I would be the first to say, just go ahead and Google that phrase right along with us if you've never heard of it before, because you're going to learn about the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism, which very briefly are higher purpose. So companies that are consciously capitalistic have a higher purpose that they serve above profit. The great news for business people is it's probably the best way to maximize your profits. Many of the companies that really do this are the most profitable. These are the stocks that I'm picking, that I'm holding for 3 years or 3 decades if I can. So higher purpose. How motivating is that internally? We spend more, the cliche goes, we spend more time at work than we do with our spouses, although that's not true in 2020 because that's kind of too timing it these days. But it is true that we spend so much of our time in our lives at work. So boy, we better feel motivated by the purpose of what we're doing. That's really important. Anyway, number 2 is stakeholder integration, where you're managing and creating wins for all stakeholders. The traditional model, I'm sorry to say, it's sometimes rooted or ascribed to the city of Chicago, not the business practice, but Milton Friedman and Chicago School of Economics, which is very admirable. And he was an amazing economist, but we do think he got it wrong when he said that the purpose of a corporation is to maximize shareholder value. And so the Business Roundtable started to back away from that a year or 2 ago with its public statement. But for a lot of great businesses, they've been doing this well for decades. And we've tried to create a company that does this. I know you've tried to do the same thing, Thea. A lot of us are nodding our heads as business people, but it turns out it's still a minority. And it still does sound like frou-frou crazy, man, if you're like, yeah, we're trying to create a win, not just for our employee, I should say our shareholders, right? But for our employees, our customers, of course. Otherwise, how can you even have a good business? Our partners and suppliers, we're not trying to squeeze them or hold them over a barrel. We want them to, Mars, which is a great example of this, by the way. This is a company I got to know earlier this year when I visited their headquarters. Mars, yep, that Mars. They began asking a question 2 decades ago, which is tipped off a internal research team. And the question from one of the Mars family, multi-generational founder family members was, what is the right level of profit for our business? And the implication is not that you're trying to maximize that, especially in any short-term way. Because if you do, and there are certainly public market CEOs who do, you actually really can screw things up pretty badly. So what is the right level of profit is a beautiful question that each of us can ask for our businesses. And the answer isn't always as much as possible, especially if you're trying to create something sustainable. Anyway, now here I am getting lost in the tenets of conscious capitalism, Thea. The other two, after higher purpose and stakeholder integration, are conscious leadership and conscious culture, which certainly the Motley Fool has tried to embody in our own small way. And I know a lot of us recognize the importance of a workplace that people want to come to every day. And I would especially say as an investor, a stock picker, Thea, I'm always like, I hope my company's like that I'm about to pick. Otherwise, it's not going to be a great stock pick.
All right, so I want to hear about that. As I was preparing for this, I noticed that in November of last year, you issued your 5 conscious capitalism picks. And I'm very curious to hear if you could share like who they were and how they did. I know there's a Chicago company that's included in that group. And so especially, because there's so many different questions that fit into that. It's not only like why you chose them and what are you looking for, but also are you noticing any difference between companies that you viewed as purpose-driven or conscious and how they seem to be surviving or thriving during this COVID period too? So.
Well, thanks, Thea. Thanks, first of all, for noticing that I did a podcast on that. And by the way, I will mention those 5 stock picks in a sec, but I'm the first to say one of the things I do every 10 weeks on my podcast is I pick 5 stocks to a certain theme. And I've done that 26 times in a row over lots of 10-week periods here. So I've done it for years and years. That just happened to be conscious capitalism. And I could have picked dozens of companies because I try not to make a new stock pick if I don't think it would conform to this dictum, which is, these are my words, but make your portfolio reflect your best vision for our future. And I try to do that with every stock pick I make. And I realize I'm picking for other people's portfolios. The good news is I make a lot of picks. So if I picked a company that you don't admire, I'd be the first to say, don't buy that one, buy one that you do, right? So I'm going to mention the 5 in a sec, but I want to make it clear that this group of 5 is just a sampler. It's like, speaking of Whole Foods, it's like that little sampler that they give you as you go up and wonder, I wonder if I would like that new mustard, or, and so that's what my samplers are and what I'm doing. So 5 companies alphabetically were Echolab, Etsy, Next Era Energy, Old Dominion Freight Line, and Salesforce.com. Those are each companies that, for me, make my portfolio reflect my best vision for our future. Obviously, I could talk a little bit about each of them. I don't think that's what we're trying to do today. I think that Echolab is a Chicago-based company. Is that right? Okay, yeah. I didn't know that. So that's part of the reason I come to these things, to learn. So that's a very admirable company. It just so happens it's the only one that's slightly underperformed the market. For understandable reasons. When the whole economy slows down, we actually produce less waste, which has been helping the planet some, but not Echolab as much. And yet it is still up. It's up from 190 to 194 since November 13th when I did that podcast. I'm looking at all the numbers right now, by the way. And should I share a screen? Can I share a screen?
Yeah, sure.
All right, great. So here's my messy desktop, but the key thing to notice is these 5 stocks. So you're seeing how they've done. And if you're able to see what I'm doing here, you're seeing that Echolab is up 2%. Market since November 13th, 2019 is up 4.7%. This group of stocks has done well, has done really, really well, I'm happy to say. And while this is only, I'd be the first to say it's just a 10-month period. We don't score ourselves over 10 months. Nevertheless, though, every single day I still track it, just like I love my baseball team. I'm not going to change my team or trade my stock, but I'm going to watch it every day, which I've enjoyed. I'm so glad baseball's back. By the way, both Chicago teams are really good this year, which is fun for Chicago. But anyway, so yeah, you can see Etsy has been a spectacular performer on its own. It's pulled all the others up, but 4 of the 5 are beating the market. They've all done pretty well. And keep in mind, the market average, a lot of companies are below this year, is just 4.7% since November 13th. So that is, that's performance I'll take every time. I would never hold it out, a small sample size, as proof that conscious capitalism works or doesn't. But because I've done this for years and years, it is an example of proof to me that conscious capitalism really does work for shareholders, even though the best CEOs aren't managing just for shareholders.
So when you're looking, how can you tell? Like, if you don't know a business, and I think this is valuable to a lot of us, because sometimes people are seeking to know about companies they're choosing to do business with as customers, or seeking to do business with those companies as suppliers, or maybe we're actually transitioning between jobs and looking like how we hear this a lot in the Conscious Capitalism chapter is, you know, what, do you have a list of businesses in Chicago that you consider conscious capitalist businesses? Because I want to go work for one of those. So as from an external standpoint, what are some of the things that you look for as you're assessing companies?
Yeah, well, I mean, understandably, it aligns with some of the things we've already talked about. I love to see a company's purpose statement. That matters a lot to me. These days, I can click a website and see an about us. If I don't already know the company, I can read a lot more about it there. When I started investing, and I'm as old as some of you, you'll remember that there was no internet, and you had to call the investor relations department at the company you were going to research, and they would mail you the annual report, which would arrive 10 to 14 days later, and you would read it over and try to figure out what the heck's going on with this company. Well, I mean, we are light years ahead of that today in terms of the information that is freely accessible to you and to me to make investing decisions. One of the first things I do is I look at the purpose of the company. I ask, does that purpose align with A, what I want for our world, and then B, with my expectations that this company can deliver on that purpose and at what scale? So what's another thing I look at? Well, we talked about it, conscious capitalism tenet number 2, stakeholder integration. Is this management team speaking the language and then living wins for everybody? You know, maybe the best chapter of John's new book, Conscious Leadership, is chapter 4, which is all about the win, win, win. And he basically says it is morally indefensible in most arenas to create win-lose. Now, if we're talking about the Chicago White Sox versus my favorite team, the Minnesota Twins, there is going to be, by definition, a winner and a loser. But if we're talking about life, we're talking about culture and society here, we're talking about business, you should look around the room and ask, is anybody losing? And you should talk with them about it, and you should figure out how to give them a win. I am not going to spend much time talking about our political world, because I don't spend a lot of time looking at it, because I don't like to look at it, because I feel like it's pitting one half of America against another half of America in different contexts. And I don't like that. I grew up in the city of Washington, D.C. That's where our federal government is located. Why do I love business? Because we are creating wins for everybody. That's when you do business right. We're not pitting half of America against the other half. And look what's resulting. So so that win-win-win mentality and seeing teams of executives that I think can deliver on that. And then what is the product? What is the service? And these sorts of things, that's what I'm looking for. And Thea, things change too. I'll share screen one more time. I wasn't expecting to share screen at all, but here we go. So that wasn't the only group of conscious capitalism stocks I picked. Maybe you were there on October 10th, I see, 2012. Thea, were you there with me in Austin? Do you remember?
Yes, I was there.
Great. So the day was October 9th, 2012. So that means we're just about 8 years later. And I brought out 12 companies in front of that august group of conscious capitalists. And I said, these companies look conscious to me. Let's see how these stock picks do. So let's go with one more list, sharing screen in the clumsy way that I do it. There's probably a better practice here, but here they are. So I called it CC 2012, that's Conscious Capitalism 2012 culture. I was looking specifically at the culture of companies. Now, some of these we'll recognize, right? I'm gonna try to blow this up a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
So maybe you see AMZN, you probably know that's the ticker symbol for Amazon. I know you know that, Thea, I assume most of us know that. It's been a pretty great company. Now, some people wouldn't say Amazon is that conscious. Some people say Jeff Bezos is hard to work for, or they're cutthroat. Other people don't like some of their labor practices, et cetera. There are different views of these companies. Look at another one there, Facebook, right there. Some people think that Facebook is creating fake news and there's a lot of bad things and it's a net wrong for society. I personally don't agree with either of those viewpoints. I admire both these companies, but I'm very open to being told by smart friends that they don't like them. Maybe they like Chipotle or Starbucks. Some people think Starbucks is evil. I don't. I think it's a great company. But here they are. So as a group, these stocks have absolutely destroyed it in the sense that you can see their performance. There are a few that Rackspace did not do well, but just Netflix on its own is up 50 times in value. And this group of companies is averaging, beating the market by 659 percentage points over 8 years. So that's a few more stocks in longer form. But part of the reason I'm showing that, in addition to just purely bragging, because that is an unbelievable portfolio. And I'm very deeply proud of that speech. I hope somebody shows it at some point, because I'm curious what I was saying. Anyway, I do want to just say that those companies, for the most part, have great cultures. Whatever you might think of Facebook, I'm sure there's a motley variety of opinions there. One thing's for sure, on Glassdoor, you're being told by thousands of people reviewing their own culture that work at Facebook that it is a great place to work. So is Netflix. Netflix released that celebrated 80 slide, here's how we do culture at Netflix. It's kind of hardcore in some ways. They're very performance oriented. And yet I think Reed Hastings is a great culture builder. So these are companies that a lot of cases are, really great to work for. And that tells me a lot when I'm looking for what to pick.
I appreciate you saying that, very achievement oriented, because I think one of the things that we feel really strongly about with, as you know, with conscious capitalism is that it's a both and, not an either or. And so it's about wanting to win the game of capitalism and do it in a way that you're making a positive difference in the world, like your business is naturally generating value and creating, leaving the world a better place. And I think a lot of times we're thinking, as you were saying, just in culture in general right now, we're really viewing culture from these either or lenses, like it's either this or that, or I'm going to make a difference, but I'm going to take a haircut on profit. And so I really appreciate you saying that, because it feels like another one of those things that we don't often think go together is being a very driven, high performance, execution oriented organization and coming from being purpose driven. I think we think that like purpose driven companies are all about sort of rainbows and unicorns, and they're very, everything's pluralistic and done in a group, and you don't hold each other accountable or have a hardcore performance culture. And at the Motley Fool, you have that as well. So I really appreciate you kind of calling out both of those at the same time.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Thea. Forget about my company. Let's just talk about yours and his and hers and what we could invest in, right? All of the different companies that the stock market, the miracle of the stock market enables us to be part owners. I need to do no work. Netflix does all the work for me there as we go up 50 times in value in the last 8 years, right? That's part of the reason I love the stock market. But, it's going to end up coming down to, as you said, the cultures. And in a lot of cases, we're talking about cultures that are always changing. These are not fixed entities. The world keeps changing, and we need to change with it. And I think John Mackey's a good example himself. He's grown as much as a leader as anybody else I can think of in the 10 years. He'd say the same thing. Even though he's in his 60s today, he would say he's grown so much over the last 10 years. And I hope to grow as much. I hope we all do over the next 10 years.
In a minute, we're going to go to take some questions from the group. But I think the other thing that just I wanted to reflect on as you were showing your 2012 picks is that you are really dealing, by nature, you're dealing with the publicly traded world. And it is a different ball game to be publicly traded. I think John say that it requires great intestinal fortitude to be a purpose-driven business and be publicly traded. And we've seen people like Paul Purcell say that we're not going to issue quarterly earnings anymore and or guidance anymore. And so I'm just curious if you have any comments about that, about just what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, we have really benefited just selfishly for our company at being private. And there's a whole journey there. In fact, you and I had a recent conversation about that, which I really enjoyed. And I see some friends like Chris Deutsch, who's here, and heard that. recently. We're not going to do that today, but we have greatly benefited from being private, not being public as a company. As a stock market investor, I need good companies to go public. We want you to be public. We're grateful if you're public. I'm so glad that each of the companies I've shared with you today, even the losers, are public companies. Otherwise, there's not a lot for us to invest in. So behind every great stock pick is, of course, the company itself, which was somebody's dream and usually thousands of people's purposeful efforts to build and then to thrive and evolve as we need to in a changing world every day. It's a deeply human enterprise. That's always how I viewed it. Both of our grandfathers were entrepreneurs, so we have entrepreneurship in our blood and a love of it and an awareness that it's such a noble undertaking. It comes with many, many challenges, and I know so many of us hearing me right now recognize those and have felt those, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune in both directions. So there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. I want to be doing work that matters to others. I want to leave the campfire better than I found it. I want to have fun. Part of what I was doing with those two scorecards, you're seeing the fun that I get to have, because I score everything that I do, every good and every bad, and I picked a lot of bad stocks, is all fully documented, just like you can look up the baseball box score for the Cubs yesterday or see how the third baseman has done this season. So that's important to me. Part of my process is rigorously scoring and learning from that score every day. So that's part of the stock market that makes it different from some other people's business, where sometimes the score isn't as clear in the realm where they're playing. But that's something that I've tried to max out.
Thank you. And thanks for throwing us a bone on the Cubs game, especially after yesterday's performance. So let's go to some questions. Like, what questions do you have for David? And I would really encourage you to remember there are no bad questions, and provocative questions or challenges. This is absolutely a welcome space for you to say, like, I think this is a load of crap. So can I say that? So please, like, what kinds of questions are you having? Or if you don't have a question, just what is showing up for you? What are you noticing that seems interesting to you? And we can take some reflections as well, just to kind of get ourselves warmed up in the conversation. So who has something they'd like to offer or ask or share?
Great, thanks, Thea. I think we'll start with Frank. He's got his hand raised. So Frank, I'm gonna take you off mute so that you can ask your question. And for anyone else that does want to ask a question, you can just hover your hand over the participant button, and then there's a way to virtually raise your hand, and then we'll get to you.
Great, I'll capture them in the chat too. So Wayne, you're up next. Frank, you're on mute.
Oh, Frank, you may have to unmute yourself.
Frank, you're on mute.
Hey, David. Hi, Thea. Hey, how many stocks should an individual investor hold in their portfolio at any one given time?
Great question. The kind of thing I love speaking to. And that's what I do every week on my podcast, Frank, is answer questions like this. So my short answer is, I think you should have at least 15 at a bare minimum. 20 really makes me happy, because one of my beliefs is that we as investors should never put more than 5% of all that we have toward a stock market portfolio in a single position. Now, I will also say out the other side of my mouth that I allow my winners to win. What do winners do? In my experience, they win. And so I want to make sure that company can run up. Now, a lot of financial advisors, and I realize this is a financial services forum. Some of you will not agree with me on this, and I can completely accept that. But many people think that you need to remain so diversified that you rebalance on a regular basis. And that's often an index fund kind of a mentality, which I understand, and Jack Bogle is one of my heroes. But really, I think that you're going to maximize your returns, which is my goal. It's not everybody's, by allowing Netflix to go up 50 times in value. And that means it's going to end up being more than 5% of your portfolio. And for some of us, that's okay. We have the stomach and or the time. Others would get deeply nervous if that happened. So we have to, Frank, we have to invest our money in a way that sits well with us, allows us to sleep at night. I think I have 54 stocks in my family portfolio. We have members with 254. And we have people who have much more focused portfolios. But so I don't think there is a right number, but I favor more, but allowing big positions to get even bigger, which maybe argues for having even more stocks.
Thank you, David. So Wayne and then Claudine is next.
Hey, David. First off, as a fellow Tar Heel, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Wayne.
You commented on conscious capitalism as well as the acceleration of digital. And as we've seen the market over the last 6 months or so, we've seen some divergence between tech companies and non-tech companies. As you think about it from both a conscious capitalist perspective as well as sort of the haves and have-nots in our society, I mean, and any thoughts about both being an investor or a conscious leader in our own companies?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I would say that we're very aware, more so than probably we were in 2019 or 2014, about the haves and the have-nots today, and in many cases, how we got there. I'm certainly privileged and advantaged because, as I mentioned, my grandparents were both, well, they were white for one thing, and they were also entrepreneurs. And so I was raised with this idea that the stock market's a great thing, and we can be part owners of companies. And what I've tried to do in my professional life is spread the good word to as many people as possible. So what we try to do every day in our business, I can't speak for each of you, but I assume it's the same for you. You're trying to reach as many people as possible and give them as much help as you can. And we're certainly not trying to pit people against each other. What I love about business is the voluntary exchange, that you're really good at this thing. You are a butcher, and you're going to put meat on my table at night. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pick a stock. And so you could buy that and retire early maybe. And we're each share with our comparative advantages, make it better for all of us. I think that's what we're all here to do, make it better for each of us. So I'm very aware of the haves and have-nots right now. I actually tried to do a podcast about this called Uncomfortable Conversations, Volume 1, which I did some weeks ago. And I really enjoyed that conversation. And the subtitle was, We're All a Little Bit Racist, which reminds me of one of my favorite songs from Avenue Q, the musical that some of you may know, which that's the title of it. So we have to realize that we all have our blind spots. We all come from a certain culture, whatever it is, globally, whoever we are, where we look at the other and we say, I don't know about that. In some cases, we don't like it, or in other cases, we're just afraid of it. We don't understand it. So Wayne, I think that that's a little bit of the talk about haves and have-nots. And, at our company, we use that word motley, which is in our name, to talk about diversity. And that's true of diversity of opinion. Like, you don't have to like the stock just because you're my employee and I like it. I want you to tell me what you think about it, right? So that's a little bit of thought there. The bifurcation of the winners and the losers right now, as accelerated by the public stock market, is its own phenomenon. It's somewhat temporary in that, just because something is trading Zoom at 80 times sales, it probably won't forever. And there's no doubt some hype built into the prices of some of my favorite stocks like Tesla, which has been an awesome 9-year hold for me. So, I can easily see some of these prices getting back to normal, and some other companies that are getting overlooked right now coming back in some cases. I also think that cheap money and very low interest rates fuels markets like nothing else. But I hope you'll also hear from me that I'm playing the long game. I've made a lifetime commitment to the stock market. I never exit. I'm always 100% invested pretty much. And I just try to find the best companies and hold through every cycle. So if the market sells off 60% over the next 12 months, we'll all remember I said that it might tonight at our time together this afternoon. But at the same time, I'm trying to set myself up and all of our members up so that we have the mindset that we understand that can happen. We have the diversification to be prepared for that. And we know that there's light past that tunnel. And so we end up long-term investors, a tautology, a phrase I try never to use because I think investing is by definition long-term. It's the traders that I'm never speaking to and never trying to be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Michelle.
So David, my question is based on what you've seen happen in the last, 6 months between how companies have responded to the pandemic, how they've responded to social justice issues. How has that changed the lens that you look at when you're looking at conscious companies?
Well, I thank you. Great question, Michelle. I guess I'm good at speaking on both sides of my mouth because I think just by nature, I try to see both sides of things and then I just talk about them. So briefly this side, briefly that, briefly this side, it hasn't changed. I was already thinking about this. This already mattered to me. Conscious capitalism. I mean, treating all your stakeholders well, creating a win-win-win mentality when so many of us are raised. It's not a natural thing to be raised with an abundance mentality in my experience or a win-win-win. We just think It's a dog eat dog world out there. You win, therefore I lose. People think that poverty is created, but I think wealth is what's created. That's the way we crawled out of the swamps thousands of years ago, naked. And now today, here I am, with an iPhone. It's because we've created together in a co-op, thanks to capitalism, especially the last couple of centuries, with all of its faults, we've created some amazing stuff, right? And so out this side of my mouth, I'm saying we're just doing the same thing. Those stocks that I picked, that I shared earlier in 2012 or November 2019, they're crushing the market. They've been helped probably by 2020. I didn't even know what was going to happen in 2020 when I picked it in 2019 or 2012, right? So that's that side of my mouth. The other side of my mouth is the world has changed. So let's look around and ask ourselves once again, who am I really behind? Who do I support? And what is the world that I want for my kids? And my kids are now 26, 24, and 21, so they're not even really kids anymore. But what are we trying to do together? I think we're here to help each other. That's why we're here. And so I think I'm looking for people who have a win-win-win mentality, who lead with love. I'm just basically channeling what is, for me, one of the best books of 2020. Just out. He's just a friend, so this is no paid promotion. But I mean, I think people from business get this better than other areas of society, and yet people don't expect this from business. And yet, for me, business has the best example of these leaders that I know of. And there are systemic reasons, speaking of systemic, there are systemic reasons why I believe that's the case. I don't think we have time to discuss that. Maybe that's a future appearance or something that we could discuss together. But I think there are fundamental reasons why the best leaders I see in society come from business.
Thank you, David. So Claudine had shared that Michelle, you had asked her question, and I apologize again, Claudine, for skipping you. We're going to John Saunders next.
Hi, David. Great presentation. Really enjoying it.
Thank you, John.
One of the questions I have is, why does conscious capitalism remain a minority? There's plenty of evidence that it works, and there's sort of a common sense that if you treat everybody well, it should work better. Is it more just an ingrained worldview of dog eat dog?
It's a beautiful question, John. It really is. My best shot, I'm good at baseball analogies. If that's not already clear, I'm going to try to make it clear. So I'm going to go with the Bill James analogy for those who know Moneyball. And I'm going to say, and briefly for the many who don't, about 30 years ago, somebody who came from outside the world of baseball began to say, hey, I don't think they're doing it right. They're not measuring the right measures. Like batting average is a very crude statistic that's the batting champion every year. It's been true for decades, right? So without going too deep into baseball, there's conventional wisdom in place, and kids are raised by parents who are teaching them this thing. I see it all the time in the stock market, by the way. There are all kinds of wrong-headed notions that people have about the market, like it's a great big gambling machine, or buy low, sell high, 4 of the most harmful words in the English language. There are all kinds of mistaught concepts. And so we might say, well, I mean, Bill James, who used the scientific method and simply said, let's ask questions and gather data. Should you bunt with a tie game in the 7th inning and a runner on first? Yes or no? The book tradition says yes. James said, I think no. And then he gathers the data and shows that when teams bunted over the course of the previous 80 years of data, they did worse than the teams that did not bunt and swung away. And yet, again, if you were a baseball executive, who is this guy? He's a journalist somewhere. That's not how we do it. And our salaries, by the way, are based on our assumptions about things, right? And so James is there saying, everything's mispriced. You're underpaying these players. So it was such a revolution. The world wasn't ready for it as quickly as we would have wished. And yet now, 30 years later, John, as you perhaps know, these are the new conventional wisdom, and rightly so, because James's ideas replaced all kinds of bad thinking, and now they're taken for granted. And he's one of my heroes. And when people ask, who's your favorite investor that shaped you or molded you the most, I always answer Bill James. But so I would just say that part of what I've discovered about consciousness and awakening is we start in dark ages, and then somebody dips their sword in fire, wheels it around their head and says, hey, let's think about this differently. James did it for baseball. I think that's what's happening for conscious capitalism. I personally believe that if you're not a consciously capital business, you're toast. I'll make this up, 15 years from now. In other words, you're not going to be in the same way that if you try to use old baseball style thinking and be a general manager, you will not succeed in 2020. If you were just time shifted from 1990 using those ideas, you will lose badly. I believe the same thing is going to be true of business. It's already kind of happening, but we're still early days. So that's why it looks like a minority. And yet look at the outsized returns of the companies that have been doing this, not for the last 6 months, but for the last 26 years that I've been following and picking stocks in the market. And I predict going forward, this is the only way to do business and really thrive.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And thank you, John. Next up is Joan Steele.
Hi, David. I'd first like to say that I am a longtime and very grateful Motley Fool member. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Joan.
I have a two-part question. My first is, what opportunities really excite you now, and what keeps you up at night?
So the ideas that really excite me now are anything that is an innovation in any industry. It's a stupid answer, Joan, but basically it's my way of saying that when I'm picking stocks, I look at every industry. I'm a generalist and a humanities person, mile wide and inch deep. And maybe you are too. For those of us who are, we can draw connections between things that the specialists don't see because they're just so awesome at that. But that means I'm an inch deep too, right? So any stock that I pick, even my biggest winners, there are people who just know so much more than I do about those companies, right? Mm-hmm. But what I am trying to do is I'm trying to ask every time, who's the innovator? Who is breaking the rules? And that's the name of my investing approach, rule breaker investing. And I think you would know that, given what you said earlier. Thank you. And so I'm always just looking for the innovators. So where are the areas of innovation that excite you, that excite me? I mean, a couple obvious ones are the internet. That may sound like yesterday, and yet here we are in year approximately 30 of the net being a thing in our culture, and we're still seeing companies go public that started 5 years ago and have done something amazing on the internet. Also, as an internet business myself, with our business, I feel like I have better pattern recognition there. But I mean, how about the age of miracles, which is what life sciences has been delivering and will increasingly deliver in the coming decades. So I'm amazed by things like 23andMe and genomics and the possibilities there. And, you know, I just think about conscious capitalism. I don't know if that's a niche. I hope it's not. I don't think it's an industry. I know it's not that. It's more a way of doing business or a way of thinking. And so that excites me. And watching the wave of that pour over everything as it's already begun to in recent years. And, you know, there's going to be a great big sucking sound, as Ross Perot once said, but it's not going to be jobs going down to Mexico, which I think was his context, as I remember. It's going to be if you weren't conscious and if you weren't pleasing your employees, winning for your customers, being a great partner to your partners and suppliers, and, by the way, demonstrating you've done something of value for shareholders too. So those are areas that excite me. And then what keeps me up at night? The worry that people will not recognize the beauty of capitalism. And when it's done right, which it has been throughout history, there have been wonderful companies 100 years ago. It's just that not as a majority, right? We're coming from kind of a dark age of dog eat dog, we have to unionize because the man will take us down, right? One of the reasons I picked one of those 5 stocks I shared earlier, Old Dominion Freight Line, it's an amazing trucking company, multi-generational, huge stock market winner. I hope somebody owns ODFL. I think it will be going forward. Nobody at that company, many of them are truckers, has unionized. Why? Because in the 3rd generation of that family business in Southern Virginia, they have been respected and they have been nurtured, and there are great opportunities. They know how to do culture well, right? That's a trucking company. Who'd have thunk it? So from my standpoint, I worry if this new generation thinks that socialism writ large is an answer. I love things like Hayek's work, which reminds us that they drew a boundary between one half of Germany and the other, played out their economic experiments over a couple of decades, and who was trying to jump from which side over the wall to which other side. I believe that's an important historical lesson. And I think that conscious capitalism can, if you need it, help save capitalism. I sure hope it does, if it needs saving for this next generation.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate you tied so many different things together there. We have so many great questions lined up, and we have time for one more. So Jesse Alexander, will you share your question?
Sure. Hey, guys. David, I appreciate the energy you bring to this, and one of the things that's kind of amusing to me is the mention of love. I really appreciate that, and it seems to be a common theme. We had Lori Lightfoot recently talk about love too, so we've got to keep that going. No, I appreciate that, and one of the things that I lead my company with is the culture of mission first, people always. So, different ways of saying it, but the same sort of thing of be true to your mission and take care of everyone along the way.
Absolutely.
But I had a question, just to kind of more around your thoughts of how do you balance the basic fundamentals of a stock of this is a company that's doing some great things in an innovative way versus just the hype or the trend of what the stock's doing?
Yeah, great question. Jesse, is it?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your wonderful statement. And by the way, it reminds me, when I first heard about conscious capitalism, I was like, well, that's kind of how I was raised. And that's kind of what we've been trying to do at the Motley Fool. But thank you for giving me a framework or new words that I can use that connect with others. So there are so many unconscious conscious capitalists. And I never want jargon to confuse anybody or make it sound like I'm thinking differently than you are, because sometimes language is a barrier. But at least it's try to create a common lingua franca platform from one good business to another, and I sure have enjoyed being part of the movement. To answer the question, from my standpoint, it's often coming down to who is out there pleasing real customers. I'll give a quick example that's very 2020. So a lot of people think that Tesla is overhyped. And while I'd be the first to say that I am shocked that it's gone from $250 a share, which is where it was about a year ago, right? It had actually gone sideways for 5 years, which is interesting on its own. Well, now split adjusted, we'd have to adjust, but basically it has gone ballistic. It has gone bananas. It's up something like 8 times in value in 2020. And for a lot of people, that sounds like flash or hype. Until you look, I think, at the beautiful cars that are fully electric and perform like superheroes out there on the highway that are increasingly being purchased at lower and lower prices, and Elon's talking about bringing batteries down, et cetera. I'm not here to be a huge promoter of Tesla. Tesla does not need me to promote it. And I have some questions myself about Elon Musk and his conduct. Yet, that is real. Real customers, real factories, not just cars, it's also batteries and solar, versus Nikola. Now, some of you will know Nikola, which is an amazing stock up until recently in 2020. Coming up out of nowhere, they're saying, me too, we've also got electric cars. And General Motors actually announced them as the partner for GM. And this is a company that has no product on the road. It is worth about $8 billion today. And it is a development stage player. I will mention Nikola has been a very poor stock since June when it touched 90. Right now it's at 19. But if that sounds bad, please know that in February, it was somewhere, I'm going to make this up, around 5. So that is an example, of a company that I would never invest in. And the big difference between them, they both sound like great visions and where we want the world to go and all the rest. But what they're missing, one of them is customers. So to close, Amazon always sounded overvalued to a lot of people. I've bought and held it for 23 years now. But the one thing they had to acknowledge is, boy, did it have a lot of book buyers initially, and then CD buyers too, and then et cetera, et cetera. It's always been real. So once you feel facile with financial statements, you can see which companies have a real balance sheet and real top line and bottom lines. And sometimes you don't have to have a bottom line if you got these kinds of companies. So I hope that was somewhat instructive. And I apologize for the long shaggy dog answers that I tend to give. As an enthusiast about these topics, I hope I didn't go too long. Let's give me the hook.
Thank you, David. Oh, we got a gesture clap from Robert. Well done. Okay, so that is our last question. So I want to hand it back to Andrew to close us out, but just thank you everybody for your engagement and for coming out and being with us today. It is, and David, thank you.
Thank you, Thea.
So much.
Great job. I've always enjoyed it. Your questions are so thoughtful.
You make it easy. All right, so Andrew, over to you to close us out for the day.
Thank you, Thea, and thank you, David, as well, both of you. If everyone give a little virtual round of applause for both Thea and David. To me, it's been a really enjoyable hour. As another financial professional in Chicago, I've been fascinated with some of the trends that we've been talking about here today. Two of the things that I know I'm going to walk away with are buy companies you admire, make your portfolio reflect your best vision of the future, which is great. Let the money direct where people want to invest, their time and operations. And number two, when you're looking at management, when you're looking at leaders and being a leader, what is a leadership style that can translate to all aspects of life? It's pursuing wins for everyone. That kind of drive of value, I think, is pretty special, and something, everybody in every facet of their life can try and pursue. So thank you both very much for bringing that up and into our lives today. We hope everybody else found this information helpful as well. And please keep an eye on the Executive Club's website for some upcoming virtual events. In particular, on September 29th, the Professional Services Forum will be hosting an event on succession and stakeholder management with some of Chicago's best family-run businesses and their leaders. You can sign up at www.executivesclub.org. Once again, thank you all very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.